Dr. Vexthara had spent the better part of 3 decades cataloguing the delusions of primitive species across 17 star systems, so when the Earth files landed on her desk with a priority stamp, she assumed it would be another tedious afternoon of documenting creation myths and fertility rituals. The Zeltharian Institute for Xenocultural Studies prided itself on thorough documentation, even if most of their subjects barely qualified as sentient. She opened the first data packet and immediately regretted her career choices. Rumpelstiltskin, she read aloud, her 4 vocal cords producing a sound like grinding crystal. A diminutive humanoid entity, capable of transmuting base metals into gold through an unknown process involving rotational kinetics and temporal manipulation. Her research assistant Kolneth looked up from his own terminal, where he'd been cross-referencing human fairy tales with known physics violations. "Doctor, I'm seeing similar patterns in their Cinderella narrative. Glass footwear that maintains structural integrity under load while remaining transparent at the molecular level. We've been trying to synthesize that compound for 200 years. Vexthara's gill slits fluttered in what passed for a sigh among her species. These humans document impossible technologies as children's entertainment. Either they're the most sophisticated fraud artists in the galaxy, or they're not as primitive as the survey teams reported," Kolneth finished, his bioluminescent patches flickering nervously. The office door dilated with a wet sucking sound, and Professor Hectoin slithered in, his massive bulk filling most of the available space. As head of the mythology department, he'd built his reputation on explaining away the impossible with primitive psychology and wishful thinking. "Dr. Vexthara," he wheezed, his breathing apparatus working overtime, "I trust you're not taking these Earth fantasies seriously. Clearly these creatures are compensating for their technological inadequacies through elaborate fiction." "Then explain this," Vexthara said, projecting a holographic display of her analysis. "Their story of Jack and the Beanstalk describes a plant that grows at exponential rates while maintaining structural integrity across multiple atmospheric layers. The biomechanics alone would require—" "Nonsense," Hector interrupted, his tentacles waving dismissively. "Primitive minds always exaggerate. They probably saw a particularly tall tree and invented the rest." Kolneth cleared his throat, a sound like grinding sand. "Professor, with respect, we've run the mathematical models. The tensile strength calculations for a plant structure reaching orbital altitude while supporting mammalian weight. It's theoretically possible, but only with materials we can't synthesize." "Theoretical is not actual," Hectone snorted. "These humans haven't even achieved proper space flight. Their vessels still burn chemical fuel like medieval torches." That's when the priority alert chimed through the building's communication system, followed by Director Yithmaren's voice, echoing from every speaker simultaneously. "All senior staff to the observation deck immediately. We have a situation." The observation deck offered a panoramic view of the Zeltharian home system, with its twin purple suns casting long shadows across the crystal cities below. But today, everyone's attention focused on the massive viewing screen displaying long-range sensor data. A human vessel hung in space at the edge of their detection grid, broadcasting what their computers identified as a standard first contact package. Standard, except for one detail that had the entire xenolinguistics department in chaos. "Play the transmission," Director Yithmaren commanded, her carapace plates shifting colors with barely contained anxiety. The speakers crackled, and a human voice filled the chamber, speaking in clear, measured tones. "Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? With silver bells and cockle shells, and pretty maids all in a row." The quantum analysis computers immediately began overheating. Emergency cooling systems kicked in as processing cords struggled to decode the seemingly innocent children's rhyme. "Director," called Dr. Habmath from the linguistic station, "our translation matrices are failing. Every time we analyze the phrase, 'How does your garden grow?' our agricultural simulation programs crash. And when we process silver bells and cockle shells, our metallurgy databases trigger security lockdowns," another technician finished. It's as if their nursery rhyme contains embedded instructions for processes we've classified as theoretically impossible. Professor Heckthwain's breathing apparatus wheezed more frantically. This is ridiculous. It's a children's song about gardening. Then why, Vexthara asked quietly, is our quantum computer asking for authorization to begin transmuting hydrogen into precious metals every time it analyzes the phrase silver bells? The chamber fell silent except for the hum of overworked processors and the distant thrum of the space station's life support systems. Director Yithmaren's voice cut through the tension. Dr. Vexthara, I'm reassigning you to the first contact team. I want a full analysis of these humans' cultural narratives cross-referenced with our technological limitations. Professor Heckthwain, your department will provide historical context. Director, Hechtone protested, surely you're not suggesting that primitive fairy tales contain actual scientific knowledge? I'm suggesting, Yithmaren replied, her plates now cycling rapidly through the color spectrum, that we stop assuming we understand what primitive means. The human vessel is requesting permission to approach for diplomatic contact. They've been broadcasting that nursery rhyme for 6 hours straight, and our computers are now drawing schematics for devices that shouldn't exist. Vexthara pulled up her research files again, scrolling through dozens of human stories that read like engineering manuals written by lunatics. Director, there's something else. I've been analyzing their narrative structures, and they all follow similar patterns. A protagonist encounters an impossible problem, receives help from a seemingly magical source, and achieves results that violate known physical laws. Folk tales, Hector muttered. Every species has them. Not like this, Kolneth interjected, his patches now strobing in agitation. I've compared human stories to the folklore of 47 different species. Others have tales of gods and magic, but humans? Their stories contain technical specifications. They describe processes, not just outcomes. The human transmission continued, looping in the background, and with each repetition, more computer systems began displaying impossible equations and theoretical frameworks that their best scientists had deemed fantasy. The humans are requesting a cultural exchange, reported the communications officer. They want to share what they call traditional knowledge, in exchange for formal diplomatic recognition. Director Yithmaren's plate settled into a deep purple shade that Vexthara recognized as the color of profound unease. Very well. Prepare a response. Tell them we're honored by their offer and look forward to learning about their traditions. As the chamber began to empty, Vexthara remained at her station, staring at the data streams that continued defying explanation. Her centuries of academic training insisted there had to be a rational explanation. Primitive species didn't accidentally encode advanced physics into children's songs. But as she watched their quantum computers continue generating impossible solutions to theoretical problems, all triggered by a simple rhyme about gardens and bells, she began to suspect that humanity's greatest trick wasn't their technology. It was making everyone else believe they didn't have any. Ambassador Keithvar had orchestrated first contact with 73 species across the Zeltharian Empire's expansion history, and each one had followed the same predictable pattern: intimidation, negotiation, capitulation. The humans, he assumed, would slot neatly between the Vorthok mining collective and those delightfully naive crystal beings from Sigma Draconis 7. He assumed wrong. The human delegation consisted of 3 individuals who entered the diplomatic chamber with the casual confidence of tourists visiting a moderately interesting museum. The lead negotiator, a middle-aged female with graying hair, introduced herself simply as Chen, and immediately began examining the room's crystalline architecture with the sort of polite appreciation usually reserved for hotel lobbies. Fascinating construction, she remarked to her companions. The way they've grown the supports directly from the foundation matrix. It's like the story of the 3 little pigs, isn't it? Only instead of straw, sticks and bricks, they went straight to biomineralization. Kethbar's diplomatic training kicked in as his translation implant processed her words. Standard opening pleasantries about architecture, followed by some cultural reference to primitive building techniques. Perfectly normal. except his implant was also feeding him secondary translations that made his lymphatic sacs contract in confusion. The phrase "three little pigs" was simultaneously being decoded as a construction methodology involving progressive material science applications, complete with structural engineering principles his own architects used for their most advanced projects. "Ambassador Chen," he began, using the formal tones that had served him well throughout his career. "The Zelthorian Empire welcomes humanity to the galactic community. We trust your journey here was without incident." "Ah, smooth sailing the whole way," replied one of her companions, a lanky male with an easy smile. "Though we did have to reinvent the wheel once or twice when the navigation computer got confused by our course corrections." The phrase hit Kethvar's translation matrix like a magnetic pulse. His implant immediately began cross-referencing reinvent the wheel with known technological concepts, while simultaneously trying to process why anyone would need to literally recreate a circular object during space travel. The results made his crest feathers stand on end. "Forgive me," he said carefully, "but your navigation systems required physical reconstruction during flight?" Chen smiled with the patient expression of someone explaining something obvious to a child. "Figure of speech, Ambassador. Though I suppose in this case we did have to recalibrate our approach when your system's gravitational anomalies threw off our calculations. Sometimes you have to go back to basics. Measure twice, cut once, as we say." Kethvar's implant nearly shorted out. The translation software was now displaying schematics for precision manufacturing techniques, while simultaneously attempting to decode what appeared to be a reference to dimensional manipulation theory. He had never heard of adjusting for gravitational anomalies on the fly, using what his computers insisted were carpentry principles. Dr. Vexthara, observing from the gallery above, leaned forward in fascination. The humans weren't speaking in technical jargon or displaying their knowledge overtly. They were having a normal conversation, but every metaphor and casual reference was triggering technological revelations in the Zeltharian translation systems. "Perhaps," Kethvar continued, his diplomatic composure wavering, "we could discuss the terms of our potential trade relationship?" "Absolutely," Chen agreed. "Though I should mention up front, we're not looking to spin straw into gold here. We prefer sustainable, long-term partnerships that benefit everyone involved." Every computer in the chamber immediately began displaying molecular diagrams for transmutation processes. Emergency protocols activated as the facility's quantum processors started modeling the energy requirements for converting organic compounds into precious metals. The phrase "spin straw into gold" wasn't just a metaphor in their databases. It was apparently a complete theoretical framework for matter conversion that the Zeltharians' top scientists had been attempting to crack for centuries. "I'm sorry," Ketvar said, his voice cracking slightly, "but when you say spin straw into gold, you're referring to metaphorical profit generation, correct?" The third human, who'd been quietly examining a decorative wall panel, looked up with interest. "Well, literally speaking, you'd need to manipulate the atomic structure through controlled rotational forces while introducing specific energy frequencies. But yeah, metaphorically it means getting something valuable from something common. Why? Is gold particularly valuable in your economy?" Kethvar's gill slits sealed shut involuntarily. The human had just casually described a process that represented the theoretical pinnacle of matter manipulation, treating it like basic chemistry while asking about precious metal markets. Up in the observation gallery, Professor Hectone was making choking sounds that his species usually reserved for extreme distress. "They can't possibly understand what they're saying," he wheezed to Vexthara. "The mathematical complexity alone." "Then how," she interrupted, "are their casual comments generating solutions to problems our top research teams haven't solved?" Below, Chen was continuing the conversation with unflappable human friendliness. "We're also interested in cultural exchanges. Our children would love to learn about your educational systems, though I imagine your approach is quite different from our traditional methods. You know, the whole give a man a fish philosophy." The translation computers began smoking, literally smoking, as their cooling systems failed to keep up with the processing demands. The phrase "give a man a fish" was being decoded as both a nutritional sustainability framework and an advanced pedagogical theory involving resource management and knowledge transfer protocols. Kethvar gestured desperately toward his technical staff. Perhaps we could take a brief recess to recalibrate our translation systems? Of course, Chen said warmly. Technology can be finicky, though as we always say, if at first you don't succeed, try again. The phrase try again caused 3 more computer systems to crash as they attempted to process what appeared to be a recursive algorithm for optimizing failure state recovery in complex systems. As the human delegation was escorted to a waiting area, Vexthara rushed down to the main chamber where Kethvar stood surrounded by overheated computers and increasingly frantic technicians. Ambassador, she said urgently, I don't think they realize what they're doing. What they're doing, he replied, fanning himself with his ceremonial diplomatic sash, is casually describing technologies that shouldn't exist while discussing trade agreements like they're planning a picnic. Dr. Hafmeth approached from the linguistics station, his equipment covered in warning lights. We've run preliminary analysis on their speech patterns. Their language isn't just metaphorical, it's layered. Every idiom contains multiple levels of technical meaning, but they seem to access only the surface level consciously. You're saying they don't know they're speaking in code? Kethvar asked. I'm saying, Hafmeth replied, checking his readings again, that their entire language appears to be a technical manual disguised as casual conversation, and they have no idea. Through the observation window, they could see the human delegation chatting among themselves, laughing at what appeared to be jokes, while their conversation caused every listening device in the facility to generate increasingly impossible technical specification. Vexthara stared at the humans with growing unease. What kind of species accidentally encodes advanced physics into their everyday speech? The kind, Kethvar replied grimly, that makes me very nervous about what they consider normal. The human delegation returned from their recess carrying what appeared to be a collection of wooden components and metal fixtures that wouldn't have looked out of place in a pre-industrial museum. Chen set the items on the conference table with the careful attention of someone arranging flowers, while her companions began assembling what looked like a child's craft project. We thought, Shen announced cheerfully, that rather than getting lost in translation, we'd show you what we mean. Sometimes actions speak louder than words, as they say. Dr. Vexthara felt her throat sacs tighten. Even that simple phrase was causing the linguistic computers to generate theoretical frameworks for kinetic communication protocols and nonverbal information transfer systems. What exactly are you constructing? Ambassador Kethvar asked, though he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to know the answer. Just a simple spinning wheel, replied the lanky human, whose name turned out to be Morrison. My grandmother taught me to make these when I was 7. Basic woodworking, really, nothing fancy. Though I suppose we did upgrade the bearings a bit for consistency. He held up what looked like a standard metal bearing, the kind used in elementary mechanical systems throughout the galaxy. Except this one was humming softly and seemed to be rotating without any visible energy source while maintaining perfect stability in 3-dimensional space. Professor Hectun had arrived with the emergency response team, his massive bulk quivering with what Vexthara now recognized as barely controlled panic rather than academic indignation. That's impossible, he wheezed. Perpetual motion violates the fundamental laws of thermodynamics. The third human, a compact woman with calloused hands who'd introduced herself as Rodriguez, looked up from where she was threading some sort of fiber onto the wheel's spindle. Oh, it's not perpetual motion. The bearing just uses ambient quantum fluctuations for stabilization. You know, waste not, want not. Though I guess technically you could call it a closed-loop energy recycling system. Every physicist in the observation gallery began hyperventilating simultaneously. Ambient quantum fluctuation harvesting was a theoretical framework that existed only in the most advanced mathematical models, requiring computational power that wouldn't fit in a space station, let alone a bearing the size of a coin. How, Vexthara managed to ask, did your grandmother teach you to manipulate quantum fluctuations? Morrison looked genuinely puzzled. She didn't. She just showed me how to balance the wheel properly so it wouldn't wobble. Same principle my great-grandfather used for water wheels, only smaller. The trick is getting the harmonics right. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, but if you can make the reactions dance together instead of fighting, you get efficiency. The Zeltharian military's scientific advisor, Commander Jex Thule, stepped forward with the kind of expression usually reserved for viewing natural disasters. You're describing harmonic resonance manipulation of subatomic forces. The computational requirements alone. Math was never my strong suit, Morrison admitted, continuing to assemble the wheel with movements that looked casual, but demonstrated precision that their finest robotic systems couldn't match. I just follow the pattern. Like my grandmother always said, practice makes perfect. Chen had begun spinning raw plant fiber into thread using techniques that were simultaneously primitive and impossible. The fiber was reorganizing itself at the molecular level as it passed through her fingers, aligning into structures that should have required laboratory conditions and specialized equipment. The key, she explained conversationally, is knowing that everything wants to be something else. You just have to convince it gently. Rome wasn't built in a day, but they built it one brick at a time, and each brick knew where it belonged. The phrase triggered cascade failures in the facility's construction planning systems, as computers attempted to model architectural projects that involved materials with inherent positional awareness and autonomous organizational properties. Rodriguez tested the wheel's rotation with a gentle push, and it began spinning with the kind of perfect mechanical grace that engineering textbooks described, but reality rarely delivered. There we go. Now what should we make? Thread's always useful. You can weave cloth, make rope, repair things. A stitch in time saves 9 after all. Commander Jex Thule was taking readings with increasingly sophisticated instruments, all of which were providing data that contradicted each other and fundamental physics in equal measure. The energy output is impossible. You're generating coherent force patterns that our best laboratories can't achieve, using tools that shouldn't work. Works fine, Morrison said mildly, feeding more fiber to Chen, who continued converting raw plant material into thread that registered as having properties similar to advanced synthetic composites. Though I suppose different folks have different approaches, my uncle always said there's more than one way to skin a cat. The biological research computers immediately began modeling procedures for extracting dermal layers from feline species using alternative methodologies, while simultaneously trying to decode why anyone would want to perform such an operation. By now, the spinning wheel was producing thread that defied analysis. It was simultaneously organic and synthetic, displaying tensile strength that exceeded their best military-grade materials, while remaining soft enough to work with primitive tools. "This is impossible," Professor Hectone repeated, though his voice had lost its earlier conviction. "You can't create advanced materials using pre-industrial techniques." "Sure you can," Rodriguez said, examining the thread with satisfaction. "Grandma Moses used to say that the old ways are the best ways. People were solving problems long before they invented problems to solve them, if you know what I mean." Bexthara didn't know what she meant, but the computers apparently did, because they were now generating philosophical frameworks for problem-solving methodologies that predated technological complexity, while somehow incorporating quantum mechanics principles. Chen finished spinning a length of thread and held it up to the light. It looked like ordinary thread. It tested like a material that could theoretically be used to construct space elevators. "There you go," she said with satisfaction. "From raw fiber to finished product, just like magic. Though of course, it's not really magic, just understanding that everything's connected to everything else, and if you work with the connections instead of against them, you can accomplish quite a lot." The phrase "everything's connected to everything else" caused the facility's quantum entanglement research computers to begin generating unified field theories that their top scientists had been pursuing for millennia. Commander Jex Thule was now surrounded by instruments that were all screaming warnings, while simultaneously displaying readings that suggested the humans had just casually demonstrated mastery over fundamental forces, using what amounted to a children's toy. "How long," he asked carefully, "have your people been able to do this?" Morrison shrugged. "Always, I guess. These are just traditional crafts. Every culture has them: pottery, weaving, metalworking, basic stuff you need to know to get by." though I suppose different planets might have different approaches. Traditional crafts, Commander Jextall repeated slowly, that manipulate quantum fields and reorganize matter at the Well, Chen said reasonably, when you put it like that it sounds complicated, but really it's just like riding a bicycle. Once you learn, you never forget, and the principle's the same whether you're spinning thread or, well, anything else really. The transportation research computers began having what could only be described as nervous breakdowns as they attempted to model bicycles that operated on the same principles as the spinning wheel. Vexthara stared at the humans, who were now casually packing up their impossible demonstration with the air of people who'd just shown off a moderately interesting hobby. What else can you make? Oh, all sorts of things, Rodriguez said cheerfully. Quilts, furniture, tools, gardens, you name it, though I suppose you'd need to see the techniques to understand them. As we say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Every imaging and data compression system in the facility immediately began calculating the informational density requirements for visual data that contained literal instructional value equivalent to extensive written documentation. As the humans prepared to leave, Chen turned back with an afterthought. Oh, we brought some other examples if you're interested. Children's toys mostly. Simple things, building blocks, jigsaw puzzles, that sort of thing. We thought your youngsters might enjoy them. The thought of human children's toys being distributed throughout Zeltharian society made Commander Jexloth Tool's combat-trained nervous system consider the merits of immediate evacuation procedures. That's very thoughtful, Kethvar managed, though his diplomatic training hadn't prepared him for gift exchanges that might accidentally trigger technological revolutions. As the human delegation left the chamber, their casual conversation continued, generating impossible scientific breakthroughs with every sentence. Vexthara turned to her colleagues. We need to understand what we're dealing with, she said quietly. Either these humans are the greatest actors in galactic history, or, Commander Jextall finished grimly, they've been casually performing miracles their entire lives and think it's normal. The spinning wheel sat on the conference table, still turning with perfect mechanical precision, converting ambient energy into organized motion while simultaneously serving as a monument to the growing realization that humanity's greatest achievement might be their complete inability to recognize their own achievements. The emergency session convened at 300 station time, with the Empire's finest minds looking like reality had personally offended them. Director Yithmeren's carapace plate cycled through colors not seen since the Great Philosophical Crisis. Report, she demanded. Dr. Vexthara consulted tablets containing readings so impossible they'd crash 3 review boards. The human thread tests as a room-temperature superconductor with neutronium-level tensile strength, while remaining flexible as organic fiber. Their spinning wheel operates on principles our physicists describe as aggressively impossible. How aggressively? Our computers are requesting permission to rewrite physics rather than analyze the data. Commander Jexthul stepped forward grimly. Director, we've found similar patterns throughout human artifacts dating back millennia. Their fairy tales are instruction manuals. Folk songs contain mathematical proofs. Children's games train manipulation of fundamental forces. Professor Hectone managed weak protest. They can't understand what they're doing. Exactly, interrupted Dr. Hafnith. We've monitored their conversations. They genuinely believe they're practicing traditional crafts. Morrison's grandmother actually taught him quantum harmonics manipulation, and she learned from her grandmother. They've unconsciously practiced advanced physics for generations. Millennia, Vexthara corrected. They call it traditional knowledge and pass it through families. Dr. Kolneth activated a holographic display. Director, the humans have records of an ancient civilization they call Atlantis, dismissed as mythology despite archaeological evidence of transcendent technology. A previous Earth civilization achieved capabilities exceeding ours before experiencing catastrophic collapse. The chamber fell silent. Survivors preserved knowledge by encoding it into cultural practices, stories, and traditions passed down, even without understanding. Human folklore is a civilizational backup system. Commander Jextool stared. They've maintained techniques from a civilization advanced enough to make us primitives? Worse, Vexvara added. Their legends suggest the previous civilization destroyed itself through technological overconfidence. Survivors deliberately obscured the knowledge to prevent repetition. Human culture teaches advanced physics while preventing recognition of what's being learned, Secretary Nulvaith realized. Perfect safeguard, functional knowledge that can't be weaponized because practitioners don't understand it. Director Yithmaran processed implications. What happens when they realize their capabilities? Unknown. But their historical learning curve from traditional crafts to reality manipulation might be alarmingly short. Dr. Havmuth cleared his throat. Director, human cooking involves controlled molecular manipulation. If they realized they weren't following recipes but performing precision chemistry, they could synthesize compounds that shouldn't exist. Their agriculture achieves genetic modification faster than our laboratories. Games teach military-grade strategic thinking. Music encodes solutions to centuries-old problems. Commander Jextool reviewed obsolete tactical assessments. What are our options? Depends whether we treat humanity as the most dangerous species in the galaxy, or most valuable. Why not both? Vexthara asked. The question hung like an unwanted proof. Secretary Nulvaith suggested quarantine. Commander Jextool pointed out the impossibility of containing reality-manipulating hobbyists. Our only option, Vexthara concluded, is treating them as equals, possibly superiors. They've solved preserving advanced knowledge across civilizational collapse while preventing misuse. They turned cosmic forces into grandmother's quilting circle. Director Yithmarin surveyed representatives grappling with inadequacy. Send Ambassador Chen a message. We're honored by their cultural exchange offer and delighted to learn their traditional knowledge. All of it. As the council disbanded, Vexthara remained, studying reports documenting how a species accidentally became gods while thinking they maintained family traditions. Perhaps that was most human, achieving the impossible while convinced they were ordinary. After cataloguing primitive species delusions, she'd found one whose greatest delusion was believing they were primitive. The real question, was the galaxy ready for what happened when humans figured out they weren't?